Welcome to Obscure Chronicle, a quiet corner of the internet where the past is soft, slow, and human. Here, we don't hurry through history. We sit with it. We breathe with it. Together we explore the lives often left in the margins, the quiet hours, the ordinary rituals, the overlooked stories that once filled a world. Whether you've come here to rest, to escape the noise, or simply to drift gently into sleep, you're among company who understands. If you find calm here, if these stories give your mind a place to rest, I'd be honored if you'd like the video or subscribe to the channel. Now find your blanket, let your thoughts soften, and let us step quietly into the folds of time. Before any footstep sounds across the flagstone floor, before the hearth stirs with smoke, before the spoon meets the pot, or the grain meets water, there is stillness, a deep, ancient stillness, held like breath between the walls of a medieval Tudor house. The air is cold, but not cruel. It is the type of cold that belongs to stone, the kind that seeps in slowly and settles quietly into corners, the kind of cold that has no urgency to leave. It does not bite, it simply lingers. Outside, the countryside still lies in shadow. The trees beyond the cottage are nothing more than silhouettes, their limbs stretching faintly toward the paling sky. No sun yet, only the suggestion of light. A grey that softens the edges of everything it touches. A thatched roof crowns the cottage, dark with dew, its mosses still asleep. Beneath that roof, thick wooden beams, rough-hewn and full of character, stretch from wall to wall, holding up centuries of breath and memory. The walls are timber-framed with panels of wattle and daub, a weave of wooden sticks layered with earth and straw, lime-washed to a pale finish now dim in morning's hush. These are not perfect walls. They bow slightly with age. They groan in the wind. They remember every winter, but they hold strong, and they hold warmth when it is made. Inside, the house is not yet woken. The air is still. Each object rests where it was last placed. A wooden ladle on the edge of the hearth, a stool drawn slightly askew from the table, a piece of linen left folded on the windowsill. Nothing moves, except perhaps the faintest dance of dust in the earliest light. There is no ticking clock, no glow of electric numbers. Time in this world passes not by hour, but by rhythm. The rhythm of sun and shade, of sleep and stir, of fire lit and fire gone out. On the floor lies a scattering of straw, dried and soft beneath bare feet. It muffles sound, adding to the hush that blankets the hall. The table, large and made of thick oak planks, stands at the room's centre, its surface worn smooth by the passing of hands and plates and time. Along its edges are simple benches, hand-hewn with uneven legs and honest joints. They creak when weight is placed upon them, but now they are quiet, resting like everything else. A narrow window, glazed not with glass but with stretched horn or oiled linen, offers a gauzy view of the outside. It mutes the world. Trees become shapes. The sky is only suggestion. A feathered greyness spreads gently across it, like a watercolour not yet dry. Hanging from one beam is a bunch of rosemary, dried and faintly fragrant. Its scent is sharp in the cold air, but comforting, familiar, grounding. Next to it, lavender, browned at the edges, still holding on to its perfume, a soft echo of summer. The ash within it is pale and fine, settled into soft ridges from yesterday's fire. Somewhere deep beneath, a few coals still glow faintly, like memories not yet gone out. Beside the hearth, a cradle of split logs. Some are fresh, resinous, sharp-scented. Others have aged, their bark curling away like paper. Nearby, a fire iron leans, long-handled and darkened by years of use. Against the wall, a heavy chest rests, not ornate but solid. Its lid is flat, its edges rounded smooth by time and touch. Within it lie folded linens, spare trenchers, and perhaps a few spoons made of horn. For now, it remains closed, content in its stillness. In the upper rooms, tucked into wooden chambers just beyond the narrow stairs, the family sleeps. The father, once a yeoman, now modest in mien, lies beneath a thick blanket of coarse wool. The scent of lanolin lingers, earthy and protective. He shifts only slightly in sleep, one arm over his brow. Beside him the mother rests, her cap still in place, her hands curled loosely, one over the other. She has risen early every day for decades, but not yet, not this moment. In the loft room, the children are tangled in a pile of wool-stuffed bedding. Straw peeks out at the seams. A small girl murmurs softly in her sleep, then turns onto her side, drawing her blanket tighter. A boy dreams of horses, perhaps, or of pies cooling by the window. The youngest, only 2, breathes through parted lips, one thumb curled near his cheek. Below, the cook's stool remains empty. Its surface shines slightly from long years of use, rubbed smooth by aprons and tired hands. Next to it, a wooden paddle leans against the hearth, its handle darkened by grease and soot, its edge worn to a softened curve. On a shelf above the hearth, 3 clay pots wait. One still holds dried peas, another a bit of salt. The third contains barley, pale and dry, collected from the last harvest. Each will play a part today, but not yet, not quite yet. The house waits. It is not idle. It does not sleep, but it holds stillness in the way that only an old house can, as if respecting the quiet, understanding the rhythm of rising. Outside a rooster calls, once then again. Its sound is distant, filtered through hedgerows and fences, softened by morning mist. From the thatch above, a soft thump. A bird has landed, perhaps a wren, brown and small. It flits once, then is gone. Inside, a single candle spent from last night rests crooked in its holder. Its wax has dripped down the side in slow curls. The wick is cold. A spiderweb stretches delicately between the candlestick and a beam above, glinting just slightly as the light begins to change. The scent of night lingers, smoke, earth, wool, and something sweet. Maybe dried apples in the pantry or the faintest whisper of elderflower. And yet, change is coming. The air is shifting, just slightly. A barely there warmth beneath the cold. A sense that the walls are listening, that the house is beginning to rouse. The coals in the hearth, long forgotten by the hour, blink faintly now with life. A single thread of smoke rises. A whisper of morning is beginning, and the first movements, soft and practiced, are nearly ready to begin. So we remain just a little longer in this pause before purpose, this breath before the stirring, this sacred moment where nothing has yet begun, and everything is possible. You are here, among the walls. Welcome to the day. The stillness begins to stir, not broken, never broken, but gently altered, like a pond rippling from a single drop, like the smallest note sounding in a silent room. The change is nearly imperceptible, but it is real. Somewhere within the walls a foot touches cold stone, a shift of fabric, a quiet exhale. The day begins not with noise, but with decision, the decision to rise, to rekindle, to serve. Downstairs the coals respond, almost as if they feel the nearness of hands. A thin thread of smoke curls upwards, searching. It finds its way into the rafters where soot clings in silent constellations. The chimney draws it in. the breath of the house deepens. A cupboard creaks open, its wood dry and swollen with age. A ladle is taken down, a kettle is touched. The old iron hook above the hearth hangs ready, rusted but sure. Water will be drawn, grain will be chosen, but not just yet. There is a ritual to waking the hearth, a respect passed down hand to hand, story to story. The flame is not simply lit, it is invited, coaxed, tended, honoured. The woman of the house now walks quietly through the hall. Her shoes are soft-soled, her step practised and soundless. She kneels by the hearth and gently she begins. First she listens. Then with care she arranges. A curl of birch bark, a sliver of kindling, a single breath. The warmth will come. The heart of the house, the hearth is waking, and with it, the day. It begins not with fire, but with breath. A slow, intentional breath drawn from lungs just stirred from sleep. The hearth, for all its might and warmth, must be coaxed, not commanded. It is not a tool to be switched on. It is a companion, a living ritual, a quiet centerpiece of home and day. The woman at the hearth, not hurried, never hurried, moves with the rhythm of repetition. She has done this most mornings of her life, before others rise, before the smell of bread or barley fills the air, before the rooster even clears his throat. The fire has slept through the night, nestled in ash and coals. Now it must be invited to return. She begins by crouching low, one hand placed lightly on the edge of the stone opening, the other feeling for heat in the ash. She knows by touch whether there is life left within it. Yes, there is. A thin warmth clings to the lowest embers. It is enough. She reaches for the wooden basket beside her. It holds what the fire loves most, what it understands. Birch bark, dry and curled like parchment, with its faintly sweet scent. Twigs from the hazel bush, gathered and dried weeks ago. Slivers of fir, sharp and sticky with resin. All chosen, all stored with care. She lays the bark first, gently. Not in a pile, but in a cradle. A nest for the ember to dream in. Then the twigs crossing one over another like weaving a shelter. Last, she draws from a pouch a bit of dried moss and crumbled sage. Not necessary, but it pleases her. The moss catches quickly. The sage perfumes the moment. From the corner she takes the long-handled iron rod, its tip blackened but trusted. She stirs the ash gently, coaxing the embers to the surface. A breath escapes them, a brief glow. They remember. Now she leans close, close enough to feel the faintest kiss of yesterday's warmth. And she breathes, not with force, not with haste, but with care. A long, even breath. The bark responds. A curl darkens, then glows. A line of smoke rises, blue at first, then grey. Then the first flicker, a golden tongue licking upward. She does not smile, but she watches, and she waits. The flame hesitates, unsure. Then it finds courage and climbs. It catches a twig, then another. She adds more wood, carefully, not too much. The fire must grow on its own terms. It crackles softly, like a voice remembering how to speak. Soon, the hearth is alive again. Its light dances against the stone. Its warmth pushes gently into the room, chasing out the chill that settled overnight. The fire gives off not only heat, but sound. A crackling, a hissing, a whispering, like stories told in an ancient tongue. Above, the chimney sighs as it draws the smoke upward. The scent is unmistakable, wood, sage, soot, and home. She takes the kettle, iron and squat, and fills it with water from the barrel by the door. The water is cold, drawn from the well the day before, kept under cover to stay fresh. She pours it slowly into the kettle, listening to the hollow sound it makes. She hangs the kettle from the hook above the flame. It sways slightly, then steadies, its bottom blackened by years of service, its handle wrapped in cloth to keep it cool. The fire welcomes it with a soft hiss. Soon it will murmur, then bubble, then sing. Near the wall a cloth sack is untied. Within it, barley, coarse ground, nutty in scent. Enough for morning pottage, warm, nourishing, simple. A wooden scoop is used. Nothing is measured, only remembered. A handful for each, and one extra, for strength. As she waits for the water to heat, she tends to the space, sweeping embers inward, brushing ash away from the hearthstone, arranging the remaining logs, ready to feed the fire as the day grows. Outside, a faint sound, the rattle of a cart on the lane, perhaps a neighbour heading to market, or a farmer bringing milk to town. The world beyond is stirring, but here, inside, it is still the beginning. The hearth burns steadily now. Its light reflects in pewter pots. It warms the lower stones of the wall. It begins to scent the air, carrying with it the promise of breakfast. Now the woman turns to gather the cooking pot. It is large, round, and deep, perfect for pottage. She places it on the trivet near the flames, careful to centre it just so. When the water begins to move, just before the boil, she adds the barley. A slow pour. A wooden spoon follows. She stirs clockwise, not from superstition, but from habit. It's how her mother stirred, and her mother before that. Each circle is gentle, each pass of the spoon a rhythm, not rushed, not idle. A meditation of morning. Steam begins to rise, mingling with smoke. The air thickens, becomes full of memory and purpose. She adds a pinch of salt from a small wooden bowl, then a crumble of dried marjoram. Nothing more, not yet. This is the base, the heart. Other things may be added, a shred of cheese perhaps, or milk if there's enough. But for now it is grain, salt and thyme. She lowers the flame slightly by pushing the logs to the side, not extinguishing, only tempering. The fire responds with a change in tone, less crackle, more glow. As the pottage simmers, she steps back. She sits on her low stool by the fire. She rests her hands in her lap. She watches. The day is now truly beginning. Upstairs the sounds of waking begin. Floorboards creak softly as footsteps cross to the stair. Voices murmur, still low, still wrapped in sleep. The warmth of the hearth is reaching outward, inviting others in. Not just to eat, but to gather, to share breath and bread, to be part of this slow, sacred rhythm. In the next chapter, we will follow the next hands to move, the drawing of water, the gathering of grain, and the silent preparations that shape the morning to come. The house is awake, and with it, the day stretches softly forward, one moment at a time. The hearth is breathing now. Its warmth spreads in slow spirals through the house, brushing against timber beams and worn floorboards. The kettle hums quietly above the flame, its sides misting with soft condensation. The barley pottage stirs in its pot, grains swelling gently, thickening with patience. But this is only the beginning. For while fire is the heart of the morning, water is its lifeblood, and food its form. Now comes the work that shapes breakfast not just as a meal, but as a ritual, fetching water from the well and selecting the grain that will be ground, sifted, soaked, and baked. This task often falls to the younger members of the household, children or apprentices, their steps lighter, their arms still unwearied by years, or to a servant rising with the first light, their role stitched into the rhythms of the home. We follow one such figure now, a boy of perhaps 9, wrapped in a rough-spun tunic, his hair tousled by sleep and his cheeks still cool from the night. In his hands, 2 small wooden pails, smooth from use, their rims darkened by time, handles wrapped with linen to soften the grip. He steps carefully through the low wooden door at the rear of the house, the iron latch clinking faintly as it lifts, the air outside biting and clean, kissed with dew and the earthy scent of thatch and smoke. The yard is quiet but not still. Birdsong begins, hesitant, sparse. A blackbird calls. A thrush answers from the hedgerow. Life is returning, slowly, as if called by the same firelight that woke the hearth. The path to the well lies at the far end of the garden, a squat, moss-covered stone circle, its wooden lid slightly ajar, a rope coiled neatly beside it. The path to it is worn, muddy in places, softened by straw. It curves slightly, passing by rows of early spring herbs, chives pushing up in neat clusters, thyme low and silvery against the soil. A hen scratches idly at the edge of the path, her feathers puffed against the morning chill. The boy walks slowly, his bare feet feeling the cool, damp ground. The pails knock gently against his legs with each step, a rhythm older than clocks. He pauses to listen, not just to the birds, but to the quiet creak of wood and the distant rustle of thatched roofs settling. He reaches the well. The bucket, iron-banded and heavy, rests on its hook. The crank, wooden and weathered, waits patiently. The moss on the well's edge is damp and vibrant, clinging to the stone like a second skin. He places his pails on the ground and lifts the wooden lid fully. The cool air from the well rises to meet him, damp and mineral, like stone and rain and the memory of underground places. He lowers the bucket slowly, the rope sliding through his fingers, the faint splash below almost lost in the silence of the garden. He waits, listens. The birds continue their cautious serenade. A single droplet falls from a leaf onto the ground, breaking the stillness with a soft pat. Then he turns the crank, drawing it upward with slow, even circles. The handle creaks, once, then again, a steady sound, familiar, not unpleasant. Water rises, not fast, not loud, but certain. The bucket breaks the surface, its sides glistening, and as it crests the lip of the well, small rivulets spill down, splashing onto moss and stone. He lifts it carefully, pouring water into one pail, then the other. Some sloshes. That's expected. The rest settles, clear, cold, ready. The boy lifts the now full pails, one in each hand, and turns back toward the house. His steps are slower now, the weight shifting with each footfall, but he knows this path. He walks it often in every season. In summer the dust is soft and dry. In winter the mud sticks and pulls. This morning it is spring, damp and firm beneath bare toes. Inside the house greets him with warmth. The hearth crackles. The scent of barley is stronger now, the pottage thickening to readiness. He sets the pails beside the door. Others will use them soon, to fill mugs, wash hands, cook, and steep herbs. Now, attention turns to the grain. For breakfast in a Tudor household is not a singular event. It is layers, a base of pottage, yes, but also bread, perhaps oatcakes, and on better mornings, something soft and warm, made with milk or ale and spices. The ingredients for these sit quietly in the storeroom, a small space tucked behind the main hall, its door low and heavy. Inside, the air is cool and dry. The walls are lined with sacks and barrels, crocks and jars. Here lives the memory of harvests past, oats threshed in late summer, wheat milled in the turning of autumn, rye and barley sorted by hand, each sack labelled in charcoal on linen. A woman enters now, perhaps the mother, or the head of kitchen, her apron already dusted with ash and flour. She moves with purpose, but not speed. She knows the room as well as her own skin. She opens a sack, drawstring loosened, the fabric folding down to reveal pale, coarse oats. They smell faintly of hay and wind, clean, honest. She runs her fingers through them, feeling the texture. Some will be ground, some soaked, some stirred directly into the pan. Another bag holds flour, finely milled, softer to the touch. It will be used for bread, or for bannocks cooked on the griddle above the coals. She selects what she needs with care, not too much, not too little. From a small jar she takes salt, from another, dried yeast or the sour scrap of yesterday's leaven. A bowl is placed on the table. Into it goes flour, water, salt and starter. She begins to stir slowly. The spoon makes a soft, steady sound against the wooden bowl, a gentle thump and slide, rhythmic, steady. The dough takes shape. She kneads it with her hands, folding and pressing, folding again. The table beneath her is scarred with years of use, but still steady. A place for bread, a place for labour made sacred by repetition. She sets the dough aside to rest, covering it with a cloth. It will rise near the hearth while she tends to other things. A pan is set on the stones, ready for oat cakes. These will be made quickly. Oats, a pinch of salt, water and heat. No luxury here, only sustenance. As she works, others enter. A daughter brings a handful of herbs from the small garden, parsley, mint, a sprig of marjoram. Another child brings a crock of milk, still cool from the cellar. The kitchen begins to hum. Soft voices, muffled footsteps. The scent of herbs mingles with smoke. The pottage is stirred again. The oatcakes laid on the griddle. A crust begins to form, golden, flecked with flour. The smell is earthy, comforting. Bread dough rises slowly nearby. Later it will be baked, its surface dark and firm, its crumb dense and nourishing. And still the fire burns, never roaring, only glowing. Each element of the morning meal is quiet. There is no rush, no clang of iron or hiss of boiling pans. Only the low song of work well known, of hands moving with memory, of food becoming more than necessity, becoming presence. The water in the pails will soon be poured. The bread will be shaped. The table will be set. But not yet. Outside the sun has risen slightly higher. Its light now touches the upper windows, golden and pale. Birdsong grows more confident. The world stretches wider. Inside, the house is ready to receive the day. The fire glows, the food nears readiness, and the people are gathering. In the next chapter, we will join them. At the long wooden table where bowls are passed, prayers are whispered, and mourning becomes community. The kitchen exhales. The house is fed. Soon, the people will be too. The morning, once heavy with stillness, now carries a slow but steady rhythm. The day has begun, not with haste, but with preparation, with care, with quiet labour. Now the Tudor house begins to fill. The hearth's breath has warmed the walls. The scent of baking bread and soft oat cakes wafts through narrow corridors and wooden doorways, drawing in the household like a tide returning to the shore. Each member comes in their own time. Some shuffle in sleepily, rubbing their eyes, hair tousled and unbrushed. Others step with more purpose, already accustomed to early duties. A father may have already seen to the livestock. A maid may have finished sweeping ash from the hearth. But now they converge, drawn not by command but by the familiar rhythm of breakfast. The long table, hand-hewn and simple, stands ready, no elaborate setting, just a cloth homespun and worn, wooden bowls polished smooth by years of use, pewter spoons, each slightly different from the next, a jug of water, a crock of butter, a small pot of honey when luck or good weather had made the bees generous. The seats are not assigned. They are known. The youngest finds her place at the corner, nearest the warm wall. The eldest sits across from the fire, his hands still creased from sleep. resting against the grain of the wood. The bread arrives first, not in a grand procession, but with quiet hands and soft steps. It is dense, round, its crust dark and dusted with flour, still warm, still holding the memory of the oven. A knife is passed, thick-handled and dulled by use. Slices are cut, not evenly, but with familiarity. A piece for each. The heel goes to the child who likes its chew, the centre, soft and tender, to the one with fewer teeth. Oatcakes are next. Flatter, simpler, their texture rougher, their purpose plainer. Eaten with butter or dipped into the pottage, they carry the flavour of hearth smoke and earth. No one speaks of them much, but everyone eats them. The pottage is served slowly, ladled into bowls with care. It is thick now, the barley and vegetables having softened into one another, touched by herbs, carried by warmth. The spoon moves in gentle arcs, steam rising with each scoop. There is no rush, no hunger so sharp it breaks the silence. For the first few minutes the table remains mostly quiet. A few murmurs, a cough, a thank you softly spoken, the scrape of spoon against bowl, the hush of breath over a too-hot bite. It is a sacred kind of quiet, not solemn but respectful, the kind of silence that grows only when each person understands the work behind the food, behind the warmth, behind the moment. Outside the sun has crept higher, and the frost on the grass begins to weep into dew. A rooster calls once, a dog barks in the distance. The world continues. But inside, the table is the centre of everything. Conversation begins slowly, not in declarations but in small noticings. A comment on the weather, the warmth of the bread, a nod to the quality of the herbs in the pottage, perhaps a laugh from the youngest at a story remembered from yesterday. No one hurries. Even when the meal is plain, it is treated with care. Bread is chewed slowly. The oatcakes are dipped with purpose. The pottage is scraped clean, not for hunger but for appreciation. Above the table, a small window lets in the pale light of the rising day. Dust motes drift lazily through the air, catching sunlight like floating stars. No one notices them directly, but their presence is felt, a soft reminder of stillness, of breath, of time moving gently. Now and then someone will rise, to refill a jug, to fetch a cloth, to hush a restless child. But they return. Always they return. It is not a feast. There is no music, no wine, no indulgence, and yet this breakfast is full. It is full of the day's beginning, of the hands that work to bring each element to the table, of the unspoken rituals that connect one morning to the next. The meal lasts perhaps 20 minutes, perhaps more. There is no clock to chide or command, only the quiet end of appetite, the sense that enough has been shared, and so they begin to rise. The bowls are stacked, gently, crumbs are brushed away, the last of the water poured, the cloth wiped and folded. The room begins to empty, slowly, one by one, returning to tasks, to gardens, to looms, to animals and errands. But the feeling of the table remains. It lingers in the warmth of the hearth, in the scent of bread that clings to the air, in the quiet satisfaction that now follows each footstep. And the table itself? It stays, silent, patient, awaiting its next gathering, its next hum of voices, its next chorus of spoons. As the chapter closes, we let the scene hold. A single bowl remains. A curl of steam still rises, and beyond the window the day begins in earnest. There is one more moment worth lingering in. One more quiet story that plays out in the background of the breakfast scene. It belongs to Joan, the second eldest daughter of the house. She is 14 years old and on the edge of womanhood. Not a child anymore, though she still sits in the smaller chair she's claimed since she was 7. Joan spent part of her morning walking to the edge of the property to check on the boundary hedges her father had mentioned trimming. On her return, she carried a bundle of mint and feverfew tucked beneath her shawl, gathered not for breakfast but to steep later for her mother's aching joints. Now as she eats, she does so with a deliberate quiet, not withdrawn, but observant. Her fingers work the edge of her wooden spoon, tracing the smoothed grooves made by years of use. Her younger brother beside her is speaking about a bird he saw perched on the woodpile. Her father hums agreement, though his eyes remain half closed. Across the table, her mother stirs a second ladle of pottage, offering it to the grandfather, who nods slowly, almost asleep. The warmth of the Tudor hearth slowly fades into memory as we step outside. Beyond the manor house, into the village and across the surrounding countryside, another rhythm beats gently beneath the pale light of dawn. The air is brisk and damp with dew. A low mist clings to the hedgerows, spilling like breath along the uneven paths. The soundscape is hushed. A wooden cartwheel creaks distantly. A chicken clucks once and goes silent. Somewhere a gate thuds gently against a post. The village is not asleep, but neither is it fully awake. It's in the gentle in-between, where labour stirs before light fully arrives. We begin with the ploughman, a familiar figure in every Tudor village. His breakfast comes early, often before daylight has touched the fields. He eats alone, seated on a low stool in a corner of his modest cottage. His meal is simple: dark rye bread, sometimes hard from the night before, dipped into ale or sour milk to soften. If he's fortunate, there might be a bit of soft cheese or a rasher of bacon left over from a feast day. He does not speak, not because he is silent by nature, but because the work ahead requires his full presence. He chews slowly, hands already stiff from the cold, eyes already watching the sky. His wife stirs porridge over the hearth, barley thickened with water seasoned only with salt. She will eat later, after the children rise. Her morning begins in halves. Half attention to food, half to firewood, to cloth, to the leaking roof. But for now, the steam of the pot rises, scented faintly with wood smoke and ash. Next, we pass the small cottage of the thatcher who has been up before the ploughman. His trade demands an early start. His breakfast waits wrapped in cloth inside his satchel. An oat cake, wrapped around a piece of salted fish, cured the week prior in brine and dried by the hearth. As he walks toward his morning work, he chews slowly, looking at rooftops through fog and habit. Thatched roofs hold stories, each one he's patched, each ridge he's laid with straw or reed. Further down the muddy lane, the village blacksmith begins his day. He's slower to rise than the farmers, but his fire must be coaxed awake. His breakfast is heartier than most. Bread, yes, but thick cut and fried in dripping when it's available. A cooked egg, collected early from the hens behind the forge. He eats standing, staring into embers, the heat warming his palms. He has no need for conversation. His day will be filled with noise soon enough. The clang of hammer on metal, the hiss of steam, the murmur of villagers with broken tools. In a house set slightly apart from the rest, the widow's breakfast is a quiet affair. Alone she eats by candlelight, dipping coarse bread into weak ale. Her meal is modest, her routine unchanged by season. She folds her hands in thanks, not from ritual, but memory. She remembers when the house was louder, when 3 children and a husband filled the small room with the warmth that fire could not replicate. Now her breakfast is slow, reverent. She eats one piece of bread, then waits before reaching for the next. It is not lack that guides her hand, but habit. Down the lane in the alms cottages near the church, the poor rise later. Their mornings are not hurried. They have no livestock to tend, no tools to sharpen. A kind neighbour has left a jug of pottage by the door, still warm from her own hearth. Inside, an old man stirs slowly. He dips a spoon into the thick mixture, his fingers curled from age. A younger woman, perhaps a niece or local helper, arrives to light the fire. She brings with her a heel of yesterday's bread, wrapped in cloth. They eat without words, sharing warmth more than food. Closer to the edge of the village, the shepherd wakes with the sheep. His breakfast is eaten outside, often seated on a low stone by the pen. It's cold. and his cloak does little to hold off the breeze. He drinks weak beer from a leather flask and eats a crust of barley bread, left dry on purpose so it would keep. The sheep bleat softly nearby. They know him. He whistles low, tuneless as he chews. The sky above him is pale now, soft blue against the fog. Further afield, the travelling tinker wakes beneath his cart. His breakfast is whatever he carried from the last market, a piece of cheese, hard but edible, and a heel of bread thick with bran. He eats by his small fire, careful not to draw attention from watchmen or distant landowners. His dog lies beside him, licking at crumbs. They will move on by mid-morning. Another village, another lane, another modest breakfast under an open sky. And finally, the market woman, who rises before most. She balances baskets on her hips, her arms already aching. Her breakfast must be portable. An apple, rough and tart, a hunk of bread with a sliver of cold mutton. She eats as she walks, careful not to drop crumbs onto the woven goods she carries to sell. The town is her goal, still distant, but the rhythm of walking, of chewing, of breathing in the soft morning air, it's all familiar, all part of the start. In a narrow cottage at the edge of the lane, nestled behind a hedgerow tangled with old ivy, a young boy named Edmund sits on a low stool, feet barely brushing the floor. He is perhaps 10 winters old, his linen shirt too large for him, his hair still pressed flat from sleep. His mother moves quietly behind him, stirring something in a small pot. Yesterday's bread soaked in water, warmed and thickened with a pinch of dried marjoram. This morning is special for Edmund. His father has promised to take him into the woods beyond the village, where they will check the coppiced hazel and perhaps gather mushrooms if the ground is still damp. To Edmund, it is an adventure. To his father, a simple necessity. But at the breakfast table it becomes a shared ritual. His father enters, stooping low through the crooked doorframe, wiping his hands on a cloth. His boots are muddied from an early trip to the woodpile, and his breath still mists faintly in the cool room. He smiles at the boy, not broadly, but in the quiet way men in this village do. He gestures to the table. A wooden bowl is placed before Edmund, steam curling softly from its surface. "Not too hot," his mother murmurs, and sits beside them. They eat slowly. There is no rush. The spoon Edmund holds is heavy in his hand, and he's careful not to spill. Each bite is steady, the texture thick and strange but familiar. His father eats with the same rhythm, pausing only once to add a crumb of cheese to the pot for flavour. The room is still but not silent. The crackle of the hearth, the drip of water from a leaky roof beam, a robin singing just outside the shuttered window. After the bowls are scraped clean, Edmund is handed his cloak. His father gives him a walking stick, its end smoothed by years of use. The two step into the soft light of morning, the door creaking gently shut behind them. Inside, the mother hums as she clears the table. She does not mind the silence. In it she feels the peace of having given warmth to her family. A simple breakfast, a memory made, a quiet beginning to a long, modest day. Together these lives form the wider mosaic of Tudor England, a breakfast not of luxury but of necessity, each meal shaped by one's trade, one's land, one's luck, a quiet meal shared with steam and cold and silence. But it is a ritual all the same, an invisible thread that ties a shepherd to a smith, a widow to a tinker, a maid to her mistress. And as the day brightens and the sun lifts higher, these breakfasts give way to motion. Fields are walked, roads are travelled, markets are opened. But in that tender hour before work replaces stillness, they each have their meal, their bread, their morning. We leave this chapter with a slow, wide view, a village fully awake, carts rolling gently on mud-packed roads, children chasing chickens, smoke curling from crooked chimneys, and behind every window, a meal recently finished, a warmth recently shared. In a timber-framed cottage near the green, young Will, just 13, sits beside his great-uncle Hobden, a weaver whose hands have shaped cloth for over 4 decades. The morning is dim still, with only the softest grey light seeping through the shutters. But the loom is already alive, clicking, creaking, sighing as it works under Hobden's practised hands. Will's breakfast is modest, a slice of trencher bread from yesterday's table and a few gooseberries steeped in brine, still sharp on his tongue. He chews quietly, watching the loom with half-lidded eyes. The loom is a narrow horizontal frame, the kind found in cottages throughout Tudor England. Hobden works it with both hands and feet, his treadle lifting heddles in rhythm, the shuttle passing swiftly between. Soft hands, strong cloth, the old man murmurs, breaking the silence. The thread listens better when you're gentle. Their wool is dyed in hues common to their station, warm ochres, gentle rust reds from madder root, and soft gold from onion skins. Blues, though admired, are rarely seen here. Woad is costly, and indigo a thing of merchants and Londoners. Later that day, a length of finished wool will be wrapped in linen and walked to the manor steward as part of the annual tithe. Payment not in coin, but in craft. Labour exchanged for the right to live and weave under the Lord's land. Will finishes his bread, brushing crumbs from his lap. He doesn't notice how quiet it's become, how even the birds outside seem to pause in the rhythm of the room. In this stillness, thread crossing thread, the loom speaking in soft clicks, he learns more than weaving. He learns steadiness. He learns silence. And so the day begins, stitched not in bustle but in cloth. A village rising not only with roosters and carts, but with the breath of wool and the hush of woven mornings. As we return to our Tudor morning, the air has grown warmer, touched gently by a rising sun. The clatter and smoke of the kitchen have begun to settle. The fire still burns low, licking quietly at the logs, but now attention turns to the vessels upon the table, the tools of daily nourishment. A meal is more than food. It is the shape of the spoon in the hand, the softness of a cloth beneath a bowl, the way a trencher holds not only bread, but the weight of the morning's first silence. In this chapter, we slow to observe the familiar objects of breakfast in a Tudor household. Each carries history. Each bears the marks of hands long gone. Let us sit quietly and consider them one by one. The table itself is narrow, with uneven legs that require a folded scrap of cloth beneath one side to keep it still. The surface is smooth in patches worn by plates and elbows, knives and cups. It may be oiled or waxed or left bare. Atop it, a wooden board or a simple cloth rests as a base for the morning meal. The trencher is a common sight. For poorer folk, it is a stale slice of bread, thick cut, designed to soak broth, gravy, or pottage. It is not necessarily eaten, but it can be. In wealthier homes, it is replaced with a flat board, also called a trencher, made from ash or beech. These might be passed around the table, or one per person, depending on rank and means. A spoon lies next to the trencher. It is not silver, not for most. It is likely carved from wood, maybe sycamore or even horn, smoothed from use. Pewter spoons are found in households that can afford them, a precious thing. The handle may be decorated with a simple mark, a cross, a letter, or a scallop for St. James. Knives are personal. They hang from belts, folding blades for travel, and broader, heavier ones for cutting at table. In a family of modest means, you may share one knife between several. It is wiped clean on a cloth, or sometimes simply licked and dried with the edge of a sleeve. There is no shame in that. Forks are rare. Even in wealthier Tudor households, they are not common. They are seen in Italy among the elite, but in England they are viewed as foreign, even unnecessary. Food is taken with fingers, knife and spoon. Pipkins sit by the hearth, squat clay pots, three-legged, glazed within but not without. Their bellies hold porridge, barley broth or thickened milk. The pipkin may stay on the edge of the fire for hours. It does not boil quickly. It waits. Drinking vessels vary. The mazer, a wide wooden cup bound in metal, is for sharing. Smaller cups of earthenware are more common. Ale is poured into them and passed with care. Water is not often drunk unless boiled. It is not trusted. Even children drink small ale, brewed weakly and warm. Jugs, called costrels, made of glazed earthenware or even leather, rest near the table or hang from a beam. Their contents, ale, cider or posset, a kind of curdled milk spiced with nutmeg, sometimes served warm as a breakfast tonic. And always nearby, a cloth, not decorative, a plain linen square used for wiping bowls, covering bread, or cradling a hot pipkin. Tudor meals are not governed by modern etiquette, but they are not without structure. At the breakfast table, quiet is common. It is early. Voices are low. The fire speaks louder than the people. The father, or eldest man, eats first. This is not law, but practice. The head of the household is served the warmest portion. After him, children, apprentices, and servants eat in order. In large households, this is enforced. In small cottages, it is a rhythm learned by watching. Food is not wasted. Even crumbs are swept into cloth or used to feed animals. A trencher left uneaten may be dried and ground to thicken a future pottage. Nothing is discarded lightly. Bread is torn, not bitten from. A small crust is held in the hand, broken slowly, dipped into broth or ale, and then eaten. The spoon is used sparingly and held gently. A child who clanks or drops a spoon may be softly corrected, not with words but with a look. When drinking from a shared vessel, one turns the cup before passing it. This is not universal, but it is known. Meals are brief but unhurried. The goal is not speed, but enough. When a person has eaten their share, they sit back, not out of fullness, but out of understanding that the meal is finished. In a quiet croft, a widow named Joan sits alone at her small table. Her husband has passed 5 winters before, and her sons now work as hired hands in the neighbouring village. She eats slowly. A bowl of barley gruel sits before her, cooled by the draught from the window. Her spoon, carved decades ago by her father, is wrapped at the end with linen string, a repair for a crack that has since worn smooth. She sips her ale from a heavy mug. The pewter is pitted, but clean. On the table, a trencher of bread is torn into small pieces, softened in the gruel, then lifted to her mouth with her fingers. Joan does not speak as she eats. She listens to the wind outside, to the creak of the roof beam, to the sound of her own chewing. She sets her spoon down after each bite. Her meal ends not with a gesture, but with a breath. She stands, wipes the edge of the mug with her apron, and sets the spoon into a small bowl of water by the fire. It is a quiet breakfast, but not a lonely one. In every object around her she feels the memory of hands of mornings past, of people once present. Thomas, aged 16, sits with his master and fellow apprentices at a long bench in the workshop's hall. Their table is simple, a plank laid across trestles. A single pipkin of porridge rests at the centre, along with half a loaf of rye. They each carry their own spoons, carved during their first year in the trade. The spoons are plain but cherished. Thomas's is slightly crooked, and he has come to like it that way. No one speaks at first. The master says a short grace, barely whispered, and then the food is passed. Porridge is ladled into each bowl, the bread broken and shared. A costrel of ale is passed carefully from one to the next. There is a rhythm to it. Dip, chew, swallow, pass. A boy who slurps or interrupts is met with silence. Not anger, just correction. Thomas watches the older apprentice, learning more from his hands than from any words. When finished, the spoons are wiped on clean cloths and tucked back into belts. The bowls are washed with cold water near the yard. The meal is done. But the lesson remains. stillness at the table. To sit at a Tudor table is to share not only food, but silence. It is to hold the same spoon, wear the same bowl smooth, pass the same jug from hand to hand across years. There is no need for ceremony. The objects do not shine. They are humble, repeated, trusted. The table is not cluttered. It bears only what is needed: a trencher, a spoon, a bowl, a mug, and perhaps a moment of quiet before the day's labour begins again. The morning, though modest in action, was dense with rhythm. Tasks passed down like stories, in movements rather than words. In Tudor households, especially those of modest means, the presence of children and apprentices was constant. Quiet, not because they were unimportant, but because they learned through stillness. Their education was silent and slow. Children were not coddled nor scolded without need. Instead, they were folded into the daily life of the home like thread in cloth. They absorbed the world through the ordinary, the laying of a spoon, the passing of a cup, the folding of hands in prayer. In these rituals, they were shaped. The apprentice, often a youth not yet grown, stood on the edge of two worlds, no longer a child, not yet a man. He had come from elsewhere, given by his family into the service of another household, with the promise that in 7 years he would master a craft. But first, he would master silence, patience, and the soft manners of shared meals. Let us pause here and observe how they moved through the morning, not by authority, but by quiet adaptation. The child's seat at the table. In most homes, the youngest children did not sit at the main table, especially if space was tight. Instead, they sat nearby, on benches or stools, or even on the floor with a small trencher or bowl to themselves. If a father or elder brother sat at the table, the children sat beside their mother or nurse, or stood by until called. A mother would feed a babe from her lap, dipping bread in warm milk or barley broth, and pressing it gently between the child's lips. There were no high chairs, no special utensils. The feeding was done by hand, with tenderness, but without indulgence. Older children learned by watching. They saw how the spoon was held, how the bread was torn rather than bitten into. They mimicked the folding of hands before the meal, the turning of the cup before it was passed along. They knew, often without being told, when to speak and when to stay still. The child's training was not a single event, but a long unfolding, over seasons, over years, and each meal offered another small lesson. Apprentices and their place apprentices occupied a middle position. Usually boys, sometimes as young as 10 or 12, they came from rural families or poorer townsfolk, bound into service to learn a trade: weaving, smithing, carpentry, or trade. They were not quite family, but not strangers either. They lived in the household of their master, worked long hours, and were given food, shelter, and occasional coin, a few farthings here or there. Their labour was expected, but so too was their observance of household norms. At breakfast, apprentices sat at the lower end of the table, or at separate trestles. The master and his family sat at the head, served first while the boys waited. Their bowls were filled after, and they did not speak unless addressed. This was not cruelty. It was custom. Apprentices shared food, shared utensils, and shared habits. Their spoons, often carved themselves as part of their earliest lessons, were personal and carried always. Their manners were shaped not by formal instruction, but by watching older apprentices, how they handled a knife, how they poured ale without waste, how they sat without slouching. Each morning was both a meal and a silent schooling. Let us follow now a quiet boy named Ellis. Ellis is 10 and small for his age. His tunic is short at the sleeves, worn thin at the elbows. He has recently come to live with his uncle, a baker, in the southern market town of Lewis. His mother cried as he left. His father gave him a spoon. The first days were confusing. He did not speak much. He rose before the sun, helped sweep the hearth, and carried kindling to the fire. He watched the other boys, how they waited their turn to eat, how they used the same bowl each morning, how they never touched the trencher before the elder did. On the fourth morning, Ellis was given a seat, a small stool just beside the bench. His bowl was filled with porridge, thick and faintly sweet with dried apple. He took his spoon from his pouch. It was simple, pine wood with a curved handle. His hands trembled. He did not eat quickly. He took small bites. He remembered to wipe his mouth with the back of his hand and then caught himself, and used the cloth at his side instead, as the older boy beside him had done. No one praised him. No one needed to. He had done well. His place at the table, earned quietly, was his. In Tudor households, instruction was not loud. It came through repetition, modelling, imitation. The adult did not pause to explain the table. Instead, they moved deliberately, and the child watched. A girl no more than 6 might be asked to fold the cloth that covered the bread. She would not be told how, but would remember the way her grandmother's hands moved, corner to corner, crease by crease. When the cloth was passed to her, she did not ask questions. She mimicked what she had seen. A boy, crouched by the hearth, might be told to fetch the pipkin. He knew to use a cloth to lift it. He had seen his sister burn her fingers a week before. He did not need to be warned again. In this way, breakfast became a daily rite of learning, a place where generations whispered to one another without speaking. There is a household in Norfolk, small and windowless, but for one wooden shutter. A sister, perhaps 15, rises before the rest. Her name is Margaret. Her mother has been unwell. Her father is away. She tends the fire, stirs the gruel, and slices the bread. Her younger brother John sits sleepy-eyed on a low stool. She places a cloth on his lap and hands him a spoon. John is 5. He is not good with spoons. He drops it often, but today he holds it steady. Margaret watches, her face unreadable. When he finishes, she wipes his chin with a damp cloth, then folds the bread in linen and tucks it away. No scolding, no reward, just the quiet repetition of 100 mornings before, and the shaping of another. These small rituals, the way a bowl is passed, the way a spoon is cradled in the palm, are not simply manners. They are a kind of memory. The Tudor child did not grow up with books and lectures. Their world was built from gesture, tone, and repetition. Each morning meal was an invitation to become part of something older than themselves, a household rhythm, a slow lineage of hand and habit. To sit at a Tudor table was to be shaped by it, not in loud commands, but in silence, in watching, in waiting, in holding a spoon as your mother once held hers, and as her mother before her. Breakfast was not only nourishment for the body, it was formation of the self, softly, daily, without need for words. The meal had passed like a slow-moving cloud, unhurried, hushed, and deeply rooted in the rhythms of daily life. Now, what lingered was not mess, but trace, the faint after-image of care and gathering. The clearing of breakfast was never a thing of urgency. It was deliberate, gentle, and done mostly in silence. As one might sweep footprints from a garden path, so too did the Tudor household sweep away the remnants of the morning table. The elder women, or the steward, if the house was large enough to keep one, would often rise first. It was not a matter of command or instruction. Everyone simply knew their place in the unfolding scene. Wooden bowls, darkened with use and rinsed only in cold water between meals, were lifted with practiced hands. They were never stacked too tightly. The Tudor people knew their materials well. Wood needed space to breathe, to avoid warping, to remain honest. Spoons were gathered, some of them small heirlooms in their own right. A few bore initials, carved carefully with the point of a knife. One perhaps had a worn groove along the edge, a trace of years resting in the same grip. They were wiped first with cloth, never with haste, and then set aside, In smaller households, a woman might keep her family's spoons in a wooden box wrapped in linen. They were precious, not because they were ornate, but because they were familiar. The table, made of elm or oak, bore scratches like old memories. Each scrape was a mark of meals before, some celebratory, others quiet, some shared in grief or in plenty. A coarse cloth was drawn across its surface, dampened slightly with water scented from rosemary or marjoram steeped the night before. This was not simply to clean. It was to refresh the air and bless the space. The scent was subtle and it lingered. Trenchers, the stale bread used as plates, were treated with care. Those too soaked from ale or porridge were gathered in a shallow basket to be fed to the animals. In larger houses, they might be dried near the hearth to be used again, crumbled later into pottage or offered to beggars. No crumb was wasted without thought. Even the crusts told a story of provision. The cloth that covered the bread was folded again, its creases pressed with fingers rather than iron. If there were leftovers, they would be placed in a lidded pot, often made of glazed earthenware, and stored in the pantry. In cooler months, the food might be kept near a windowsill or in a larder lined with straw. Preservation was not a luxury. It was a form of wisdom. The washing was done with water drawn earlier in the morning, warmed by the fire if fuel allowed, or else cold from the well or rain barrel. A shallow basin was placed on a stool, and the utensils washed with ash or sand, depending on what was at hand. The hands that washed were red with cold in winter, and in summer damp with the heat of the hearth. But they moved without complaint. Washing was not separate from life. It was part of it, rhythmic and rooted in necessity. A young girl might be given her first chance to clean a single spoon, a soft task to learn her grip, her patience. An older boy might carry the water away once it was grey with silt and crumbs. He would pour it at the base of a tree or along the edges of the herb garden, watching it vanish into the earth. The fire, now banked and quieter, still offered its low warmth. A few embers flickered like sleepy eyes beneath a grate of iron. Ashes from the cooking fire were swept into a clay pot. They would be used later for soap or mixed with lye to clean linens. Even here, nothing was wasted. The remnants of flame found new purpose. In some homes, after everything had been cleared and wiped, a candle was lit not for light, but to carry the stillness forward. It flickered in the corner, near a shelf of dried herbs or by a window streaked faintly with condensation. The air was different after the meal, softer, as if the house had exhaled. And in that air something else lingered, a sense of order, of gentle closure. The kitchen did not fall silent. It simply changed tone. The scraping of chairs was followed by the creak of a door. Footsteps padded across beaten earth or uneven flagstone. The day had begun in earnest, but it had begun clean. In a house near the edge of a wooded glade, a woman named Agnes wiped her table slowly. Her son had left early to fetch flour from the mill, and her youngest still slept in the cot beside the hearth. The bowl in her hand was warm from her breath. She had exhaled onto it before polishing the inside with a soft cloth. It was a habit her mother had taught her. "It shines better," she'd said. Whether true or not, Agnes always did it. A small gesture, like a whisper to the past. In another home, a boy named Hugh finished stacking the trencher bread and was handed a small pot of ashes by his grandmother. "Sprinkle just so," she said, "like snow over earth." He did, watching the fine powder fall over the scrubbed stone floor. The ashes would catch the grease before being swept away. Later, the kitchen would be used again, for midday meals, for stews and broths and bread set to rise. But for a little while it rested, like a book returned gently to its shelf. There was satisfaction in that rest, a kind of reverence for the domestic quiet. For the Tudor household, cleaning was never just about tidiness. It was about restoration, about returning the space to calm, to readiness. The table, once full, now empty, became a symbol of care itself, a promise that tomorrow and the day after would begin with the same slow unfolding. And when the room had emptied, when the cloths were rinsed and hung to dry near the back door, only the scent remained, of rosemary water, of cooled ash, of spent bread and drying wood. These too were part of the home's voice, unspoken but deeply known. In a small stone cottage just beyond the edge of a market village, a widow named Merrill moved with the careful grace of someone used to quiet. Her husband had been gone 2 winters now, and her grown children were scattered in households of their own. Still, she kept the same routines, the same tablecloth folded just so, the same pewter bowl set out by the windowsill for cooling herbs. This morning, the meal had been shared only with her granddaughter, a pale little girl named Ellen with a crown of unruly curls and a habit of humming tunelessly as she worked. They had eaten simply, warmed ale bread with honey and a wedge of dried pear. The honey had been a gift, a token from a neighbour, and Merrill had cut it sparingly, teaching Ellen how to stretch sweetness. After the meal, Ellen began gathering the dishes, her fingers too small to hold more than one at a time. Merrill watched without correcting her, listening to the slow tapping of wooden bowls meeting wood. There was something soothing in the sound, like rain on a distant roof. Then came the bucket, warm water from the fire, now steaming faintly in the morning chill. Merrill rolled up her sleeves and guided Ellen's hands through the water, one spoon at a time, showing her how to tilt the edge just enough to rinse the last bit of honey from the wood. "See here," she whispered. "Don't rub so fast. Let the cloth carry the water." Ellen giggled at first. The water tickled and the bowl slipped, but her laughter soon gave way to focus. The girl was learning the ritual, not just the task. This too was inheritance, not silver or land, but the knowledge of how to tend a home with grace. When they finished, Merrill opened the back door to throw the grey water onto the herb bed. Steam rose as it struck the earth. In it, Merrill saw a memory, a moment years ago when her own mother had stood at this very door, her silhouette framed in morning light, pouring water in just the same way. She reached for Ellen's hand and pressed it gently. "This is how we begin things," she said. "Quiet and clean. That way the rest of the day can unfold right." And so the moment passed, soft and ordinary, but deeply rooted, a single act of washing made sacred by the way it was remembered. The morning meal had long passed, and the house, though still faintly infused with the warm scent of hearth smoke and baking bread, began to shift into its next rhythm. In the dimmer corners of the kitchen, where the fire's glow could not reach, dust and fragments of straw had gathered, brought in from boots worn on muddy thresholds, or dropped by the house cat as it paced its slow circling watch. The flicker of daylight now danced across the wooden floor, illuminating not grand banquets or the rich attire of nobles, but the humble movement of a broom woven from bound twigs, guided by steady, knowing hands. There is something timeless in the act of sweeping, a rhythm without urgency, no haste, no great drama, just long, patient strokes over uneven planks, worn smooth by generations. The woman's sleeves were rolled past her elbows, a smudge of ash near her wrist where she had earlier brushed the hearth. She worked not for praise nor ceremony, but because it was part of the household's silent breath. Inhale in the making, exhale in the tidying. A cycle. She moved around stools with legs polished by countless touch, sweeping bits of oat husk and bread crust toward a small pile. A broken feather, perhaps from the geese out back, twirled in the current of her broom's path before settling. She paused, crouched to gather the pile into a shallow pan, and stood once more. The sound of the bristles on the wood was soft, nearly meditative. Swish, swish, swish. No words were spoken, but all around her the room began to breathe anew. In the hearth, a low flame still pulsed with quiet life. The fire, though diminished from its earlier roaring, remained vital, its coals deep and glowing. She leaned near, one hand on her knee, the other gently prodding the embers with the iron poker. Occasionally a tiny flame would leap up from the ashes, ignited by her stirring, then settle once more into orange glow. Fire was not only warmth, it was memory, continuity, and the gentle ticking of Tudor life. Its presence in the home meant more than mere comfort. It was the soul of the kitchen, the very heart of the household. She reached for a split log, dry and pale against the soot-stained stones, and placed it gently onto the embers. A faint hiss, a curl of smoke, then a brief lick of flame. Not too much, just enough to carry warmth through midday. The art was in the balance. Too much fuel and the room became stifling, the wood wasted. Too little and the coals would falter, requiring a time-consuming relight later. Tending the fire was an act of attention. It could not be rushed or ignored. Elsewhere in the house, other windows were being opened, not swung wide, but just enough to let in the cool, green breath of the June morning. Airing the room was a subtle ritual. It invited freshness inside, dispelling the heaviness of cooked oats and candle smoke. The wooden shutters creaked softly as they parted, the hinges oiled but still burdened with years. Light crept through, gilding the air in gold, catching the swirl of dust motes and making them dance. She stood by the open window for a moment, her hands resting on the stone sill. From outside came the distant sound of hens murmuring, the far-off call of a cart's wooden wheels trundling along the village road. The breeze carried with it the scent of cut grass, of dew drying from the thatch, and the subtle pepper of rosemary growing just outside the door. Even as she lingered there, letting the breeze curl around her arms, her thoughts turned to the duties yet undone. Yet there was no rush. The air, the hearth, the sweep of the floor, all worked in harmony. The home did not demand, it invited. And so she moved again with purpose, but always gently. Near the fireplace stood the ash bucket, an old blackened thing, scarred by years of service. She lifted it carefully, its iron handle cool to the touch, and poured out the cooled ashes from the morning's blaze. They sifted down like snow into the earth near the garden, where they would be scattered among the plants. Nothing was wasted. Even ashes found purpose, softening soil, drying paths, deterring pests. It was the quiet science of everyday living. In Tudor times, household ash was not merely discarded. Its alkaline nature made it valuable for cleaning, fertilizing, and even soap-making. Mixed with animal fat, it could be rendered into lye, a basic soap used sparingly by washerwomen and maids. For many, knowing how to reuse what the fire gave was not ingenuity, it was necessity. Ash could be sifted through to remove charcoal chunks for reuse, and the rest saved in sacks for later work. Returning from the garden edge, she paused to straighten a small bench by the hearth, its leg slightly uneven from age. Beside it sat the family cat, curled and watching, its tail flicking once, lazily, as if to note the changes in the air. She bent to scratch behind its ear, receiving in return a low purr, a sound that melted easily into the quiet room, as natural as the creak of the beam above, or the tick of the kettle's lid with every soft bubble of warming water. The child entered then, no longer carrying wood or chasing chores. He came barefoot this time, holding a dull, split wooden toy carved by his father weeks before. He walked carefully, his eyes tracking the broom now resting against the far wall. He had watched the sweeping many times, and understood it, if not as work, then as part of the rhythm he had always known. He did not speak, but sat cross-legged by the hearth's edge, where the floor was warm. A hand reached out to feel the stone, still warm, still safe. The woman moved behind him, now taking a cloth to the windowsill, gently wiping away the morning's condensation. No rush. Her movements were as natural as breath. Wipe, fold, set aside. In the corner, a sprig of lavender, tucked into a small crock, scented the air without command. A home does not raise its voice. It hums, and in that hum, in those small acts, sweeping, airing, tending fire, it continues. There came a soft knock at the back door, not hurried nor insistent. Just 3 measured taps, the kind of knock that didn't ask for alarm or haste, but rather invited acknowledgement when the moment allowed. The woman looked up from where she stood folding a linen cloth. She did not rush to the door. Instead, she placed the cloth upon the stool near the hearth and made her way quietly across the floor, her slippers making the faintest whisper against the planks. When she opened the door, a breeze stirred the hem of her apron, and the scent of herbs drifted in before the figure outside stepped into view. It was Mistress Ellen from 2 cottages down, a widow in her middle years, well known in the village for her fine garden and calm, lilting voice. She stood with a basket tucked against her hip, loosely covered in gauze to keep the wind from scattering its contents. Her cheeks were lightly pink from the morning air, and a soft smudge of soil lingered at the edge of her fingernail. "Good morning," she said with a gentle smile, her voice no louder than it needed to be. "And to you, Mistress Ellen," came the quiet reply. "Come in, if you please. The fire's still kind." The visitor nodded once and stepped into the kitchen, pausing to let her eyes adjust from the pale brilliance outside to the muted amber within. Her gaze swept across the space, the clean floor, the resting cat, the lad at the hearth, and her smile deepened. "You keep your house still and sweet," she said, not as flattery, but as observation. The woman accepted the words with a nod and a brief glance toward the fire. "It breathes slow today," she said simply, as if referring to the house itself. Ellen moved to the table and gently laid down her basket. With care she peeled back the covering, revealing bunches of dried and drying herbs, pale sprigs of thyme, bunches of lemon balm with its curling leaves, stalks of tansy, and a coil of marjoram tied with twine. "They came down nicely in the warm spell," she said, lifting a bundle of sage and brushing it with her fingers. "Not too brittle. Thought you'd take some for your shelf." The other woman stepped forward, inhaling the subtle but varied scents. Earthy, peppery, green, and sweet all at once, each note distinct yet not overwhelming. "They'll do well above the hearth," she said, reaching to touch a strand. "You're generous." Ellen shrugged with grace. "The garden grows what it will. It does no good bottled up, and I like to see it used, not hoarded." She paused, then glanced around the room. "And I thought your boy might like some balm for his rash. It's common this time of year, what with the dust and the pollen." The woman nodded again. "He scratched at it in sleep. Lemon balm will do. I'll steep it later if there's time." A silence fell between them, not awkward, but companionable. Ellen walked to the open window and looked out briefly. "The wind's gentled," she remarked. "By noon it may carry the scent of lavender again." Outside, birds called lazily from the thatch line. 1 or 2 hens clucked in discontent near the back fence, though not with urgency. "Have you still your soapstone pot?" Ellen asked after a moment. "I've been rendering a bit of soap from the last of the ash and tallow. Thought you might make use of some." The woman gestured to the shelf above the hearth. "Still there, though I've not touched it since Easter." "I'll bring some tomorrow then," Ellen said with a soft nod, adjusting her shawl. "If the sun holds, I'll steep rosemary too." The conversation moved like the morning itself, unhurried, without the need to fill every moment. When Ellen turned again to her basket, she picked out a few bundles and tied them together with twine. With practiced fingers she fastened a small slip of linen around the stems, a gesture not just for order but for care. "These can hang near your window," she said, handing them over. And the balm I'll leave in the bowl." The woman accepted the gifts with a bow of her head and a quiet "thank you." Ellen lingered a moment longer, watching the boy now lying on his belly near the hearth, tracing lines in the dust with a stick. She smiled but did not speak to him. Some children were best left to their stillness. "I'll not keep you," she said at last, and turned to go. But before she stepped out, she paused at the threshold. "There's talk the baker will have his oat loaves early this week," she said softly, almost absently. "If you're in need." The woman nodded. "I'll send word, or the boy if I'm busy." With that, Ellen stepped back into the light. The woman stood at the door for a moment, watching as her neighbour walked down the path, her figure slowly shrinking into the brightness of the day, basket swinging at her hip, shawl fluttering with the breeze. When she closed the door again, the house seemed unchanged, and yet, in the stillness, there lingered the faint new fragrance of lemon balm and sage, hanging in the air like a memory. She moved back to the hearth and knelt again beside her son, now curled like the cat in a patch of warm stone. She brushed his hair aside and touched his temple gently, then turned to place the bundle of herbs upon the window-sill, where it would catch the drying breeze. The room, once swept, now felt even lighter, and so she resumed her day, not marked by bells or proclamations, but by the rhythm of tasks and the silent poetry of being present within them. Later that afternoon, while the hearth had settled into its quiet hum, and the bundle of herbs swayed ever so slightly at the open window, a second figure arrived, not at the door, but at the side gate. The woman noticed the creak of the latch as she was turning over a pan of drying peels near the hearth, and when she looked up, she saw young Matty, the cooper's apprentice, no more than 11, standing uncertainly with a parcel under his arm. He was a wiry lad with a tuft of unruly hair and cheeks dusted with flour, likely from the miller's earlier errand. In his hands he carried a cloth-wrapped packet, carefully balanced, as though it were more delicate than it appeared. He didn't call out nor knock, just waited with the sort of patient stillness only children on chores learn, when they are too shy to shout but too dutiful to walk away. The woman wiped her hands on her apron and walked out to meet him. She didn't speak at first, simply nodded once, a silent invitation to speak. He looked relieved. "Mistress Aldwych sent this," he said, offering the bundle. "She said it's your rosemary vinegar, and the paper's inside." The woman took the parcel carefully and opened a corner to peek. Within, nestled in straw and tied glass, was a stoppered bottle and a folded scrap of ink-marked paper. The vinegar was homemade, steeped in sprigs of rosemary and marigold petals, sharp and sweet. She'd bartered for it a week ago, trading a sack of dried apple slices and a length of waxed linen. "Thank you," she said quietly. He shifted his feet and gave a polite bob of the head, already preparing to leave, but she paused him with a lifted hand. "Wait," she said. "Have you eaten since the bell?" He blinked, unsure whether honesty would be taken as rudeness. He glanced at her face and then shook his head. "Bread and broth in the bowl there," she said, gesturing back toward the house. "Sit on the step." He hesitated only a moment before nodding, then crouched on the smooth threshold stone where the sun warmed the flagging beneath his legs. The woman disappeared for a moment, then returned with a wooden bowl of broth, light, with barley and a few root slivers, and half a heel of bread rubbed with garlic. She said nothing as she handed it to him, and he said nothing in return, except a quiet, "Thank you, mistress," murmured between mouthfuls. As he ate, she returned to her tasks, quietly tucking the vinegar away in the pantry niche, placing the folded paper with her other receipts and tokens. When she came back out, the boy had finished and set the bowl neatly beside him. He wiped his mouth on his sleeve, awkwardly, though not impolitely, and stood. "I'll be off now," he said. She gave a soft nod. "Tell Mistress Aldwych it came whole, and tell her the cat's better. He blinked at that, confused for a moment, until he realized it was a kindness, not a message, a way of saying that nothing was wrong and all was as it should be. He nodded once more and took off down the path, arms swinging freely now, his pace more a skip than a stride. The woman watched him go for a moment before turning back inside. In the fading light of the afternoon she returned to the window, where the bundle of herbs still hung and the air held the faintest scent of rosemary, sweet, sharp, and somehow like memory itself. The house, now aired and swept, scented and still, breathed around her like a gentle sigh. The light had softened by the time the woman gathered her basket of sewing and sat down by the window, where the afternoon sun, warm and unhurried, pooled across the flagstones like spilled honey. It was the kind of hour when time seemed to stretch gently, not from laziness, but from acceptance, the sense that all things would be done in their time, and that there was no sense in hurrying what was meant to be steady. Her needle basket was not ornate, but it was familiar. A round wooden bowl, the rim worn smooth by years of careful hands. Inside, a small roll of pins wrapped in waxed linen, a pincushion made from an old scrap of bodice lining, several coils of thread, brown, black, off-white, and 2 ivory bobbins wound with fine cotton. A thimble lay tucked near the edge, dented but loved. She drew out the first garment with quiet purpose, a child's shift, fraying at the seams where the fabric had worn thin from repeated washings. The linen, once coarse, had softened with use, taking on a suppleness that made it all the more prone to tearing. She turned the seam over between her fingers, pinched the edge and threaded her needle. The needle moved in and out of the cloth with practiced ease. A small, quiet rhythm, the kind of sound too faint to call attention to itself, but one that a house slowly grows used to, like the whisper of a cat's paw on floorboards or the creak of a wicker chair. She wasn't alone. On the other side of the hearth, her eldest daughter, barely into her 13th year, sat cross-legged with her own bit of work, a hem to stitch and a small patch to apply to the corner of an apron that had seen more than its share of flour. Her stitches were uneven still, but steady, and the girl worked with her lips gently pursed, murmuring under her breath the rhyme the midwife had once taught her: in and out and pull it tight, thread it neat and make it right. The rhyme wasn't necessary any more, but it lingered out of habit, a quiet melody for the fingers to follow. Near them on the bench rested a pair of woolen hose. The woman had turned them inside out earlier, finding the threadbare spot near the heel where her husband's boots wore them thin. She had already prepared the patch, a small circle cut from an old wool tunic, felted soft with age, perfect for reinforcing the wear. There was no urgency to the work. Mending was never hurried. If it was done poorly, the cloth would protest, but if it was done gently, with needle and thread as patient as breath, the garment would sigh back into usefulness, and that was enough. From the kitchen came the slow drip of water into a pail beneath the wash basin, the last of the dishwater draining out. The fire, low now, crackled occasionally, more whisper than roar. The cat had moved to the windowsill, curled into itself, watching the shifting branches beyond the glass. The girl looked up. "Will I learn to make sleeves next?" she asked, holding the apron up to inspect the patch. The woman paused, turning her work over in her hands. "Sleeves need patience. They must fit shoulders like gloves fit fingers." The girl nodded, not discouraged, just filing the thought away. There would be time. Always time. From under the bench the boy stirred in his sleep, one arm thrown out dramatically as though mid-dream. His cheeks were flushed with the last of the sun, and a dried marigold petal clung to the edge of his hairline. No one moved to brush it away. It belonged to the moment. The woman reached for a bundle of buttons in a small cloth pouch. They were all different. Bone, horn, a few of wood, and 1 or 2 scavenged from long-lost garments. She selected a pair, similar enough to match, and began to fasten them back onto the bodice of a work gown whose fasteners had come loose last market day. She remembered distantly the gown being made. It had been the summer of her second child's birth, when her hands had barely kept up with the growth of the family. The dye had been soft grey then, now faded but still proud. Outside the sky was changing. Not dramatically. No thunderclouds, no golden sunset. Just a slow deepening of the blue, a quiet folding of day into dusk. Her daughter held up the apron again, this time with a smile. The patch wasn't perfect, but it held. And it would hold through bread-making, sweeping, berry-picking, and whatever else the coming weeks required. That, too, was enough. The woman nodded, and her daughter beamed. They both returned to their stitching. And time, in that small, softened space, went on. Not forward or back, but simply on. As the girl folded the mended apron into her lap, smoothing its corners with care, she glanced up at her mother with a curious, almost wistful expression. "Ma'am," she said quietly, not lifting her eyes, "did you have an apron like this when you were small?" The woman looked over, her fingers stilling over the thread. It wasn't a question she had expected, not complicated, but the kind that arrived unannounced and opened a door in the mind long shut. She rested the needle back into its cushion and leaned slightly back, gazing through the window where the last edge of daylight brushed the sill. The house was quiet, the boy sleeping still, the cat now stretched long, half in shadow. "I did," she said after a pause. "It was blue, with white thread at the hem. My mother made it from a bit of curtain cloth that hung too long in the pantry. She said it had already seen its better days, but it would do for something that needed washing each week." The girl tilted her head. "Was the thread crooked?" The woman smiled, her lips barely moving. "It was, and I was proud of it just the same." She reached for a small length of folded cloth resting under the sewing basket and unfolded it slowly. It was faded, a soft greyish blue now, nearly the shade of the hearthstones. But there, along the bottom edge, was the faintest hint of a stitched line, clumsy and uneven. "I kept this bit," she said. "Cut it from the hem before the rest was turned into a rag." The daughter leaned forwards to see. Her fingers hovered near the cloth, reverent but uncertain. "Did you sew that part?" "I did," the woman answered. "The first I ever stitched. I remember the pricks on my finger, and how proud I was that it held, even when it bunched." The girl looked at the line of stitches with a kind of solemn wonder, as though she'd discovered something ancient and sacred. "Was your mam like you?" she asked. The woman's gaze softened further, touched by the question. She was quieter, spoke less than I do, but her hands were never still. She always had something in them. Thread, a spoon, a sprig of thyme. Even when she sat, she was mending or darning or twisting wool. She paused, folding the swatch again. "I remember how she'd sing when she worked," she added. "Nothing grand. Just little hums, bits of lullaby. She said sound made the cloth behave." The girl smiled and nodded slowly, as though she understood something, even if she didn't yet have the words for it. "Maybe I'll keep this patch too," she said suddenly, touching her apron. "When I grow out of it." The woman looked at her with quiet warmth. "You may, and when you do, you'll know it held." For a moment, the only sound in the room was the soft exhale of the sleeping boy and the shift of fabric as the cat stretched. Then the daughter leaned back, threading her needle again, her brow furrowed just slightly in thought. Outside, the last birds of the day sang their simple dusk song, and in the warm hush of the fading afternoon, mother and daughter bent again to their work, not out of obligation, but out of quiet rhythm and the soft echo of hands that had come before. The house had grown dim. The sun had long since slipped beneath the hedgerow, and what little light remained came in softly, not from the sky now, but from within, the low, gentle burn of the hearth. The woman moved slowly. Her footsteps were measured, her gestures careful, not from weariness, but from a kind of reverence. Evening had come, and with it, the part of the day she liked best, the quiet preparation for the day to come. The hearth still glowed a dull, deep orange, the fire's earlier vigour now reduced to gentle breathing. Ash shifted in small waves when stirred. The woman squatted low before it, taking up the iron poker with hands that knew its weight exactly. She stirred gently, not to fan the flames, but to rearrange the embers, stacking the hottest coals in a small mound near the back wall of the hearth. The rest she scattered lightly, watching the sparks blink like distant stars before vanishing into dark ash. Near her, the cat stirred, stretched and curled tighter, tail across its nose. It had found its place for the night and would not move again unless disturbed. She reached for the small basket of kindling, dry twigs, pine cones, a bit of broken reed mat, and laid a few pieces atop the glowing mound, not to light tonight, but to coax readiness for morning. It would catch more quickly with some breath of life beneath it. Once that was done, she rose slowly, wiped her hands on her apron and crossed to the other side of the hearth where the firewood was stacked in a small, tight pile. The logs were dry and clean, chopped to the length that fit snugly into the brick hollow. She chose two and placed them across the mound of embers like crossing arms. Tomorrow, it would take only a whisper of flame to bring them to life. She fetched the ash pan then, a shallow, wide dish of iron, its handle wrapped in worn cloth, and gently swept the cooler ash from the front of the hearth into it, leaving behind only a smooth border of clean brick. The sweep of the broom against the hearthstones was slow and soft, like a lullaby in motion. Dust rose briefly, caught the last flicker of firelight and fell again untroubled. The girl watched her from across the room, chin resting on her hands, elbows pressed into the old wooden table. She didn't speak, nor did her mother. It was not a time for words. There was something solemn about the act of bedding the fire, something close to prayer. When the ashes were gathered, the woman carried the pan outside and tipped it carefully at the base of the hedge, away from the house. Ash from the hearth was useful, mixed into soap, added to compost, scattered on icy stones. But tonight she left it simple, returned to the earth without ceremony. Inside, the hush had deepened. Even the soft clicks and hums of settling wood and stone had quieted, as though the house itself was preparing for rest. Returning to the hearth, she took a last look at the small construction she had made. Coal, kindling, wood, all set in place. She covered it lightly with an old iron plate, fitted perfectly to the mouth of the fire, leaving only a crack for air. It was enough. In the morning, a single breath and spark would bring it back. The girl rose and joined her. "Will it still be warm?" she asked in a near whisper, as though to speak louder might disturb the magic of the moment. "It will," the woman replied, "if we've done it right." She placed her hand over the iron cover, feeling the faint pulse of heat. Not fire, not yet, but something quieter, a promise. The girl leaned in closer, her face warmed by what little glow escaped through the crack. "It's like it's sleeping," she murmured. Her mother smiled faintly. "It is. Fires rest too." They lingered together in silence, heads bowed toward the hearth like congregants before an altar. Then, without speaking, the woman turned away and crossed the room to the window, drawing the wooden shutter closed with a soft clack. She set the iron latch in place with care. The room dimmed further, the outside world shut out, the flickering glow now the only light. Behind her, the girl fetched the candle from the table, its flame small but steady. She cupped her hand around it as she walked, instinctively shielding it from breath and breeze. She placed it on the mantel, beside the fire, where its light could stretch across the room. The woman joined her, and together they stood in the soft twin glow of ember and flame, shadows stretching gently along the stone wall behind them. "I'll trim it," the woman said, reaching for the small knife tucked near the hearth. She pinched the wick gently and snipped the charred end. The flame shivered, then steadied. From the room beyond came the sound of the boy stirring, not fully waking, just the restless shuffle of limbs as he turned in his blanket. The girl listened, then smiled to herself, reassured by the sound. The woman stepped toward the shelves and retrieved a soft woolen cloth, folding it once, then again. She set it near the hearth, where the warmth would reach it slowly through the night. "For your brother's hands," she said, not as a suggestion, but a simple truth. The girl nodded. They sat together then, not on chairs but on the hearth bench, side by side, their shoulders just touching. They did not speak, and they did not need to. The kind of quiet that filled the room was not empty, but full, of breath, of warmth, of the long unbroken thread of care that ran from one day to the next. The fire did not dance or crackle, it simply glowed. And in that glow, the house settled fully into night. The girl leaned her head lightly against her mother's arm. The warmth from the hearth, though modest, wrapped around them like a shawl. It was not hot, nor did it need to be, just steady. After a long pause, the woman spoke softly, more to the fire than to anyone else. "It wasn't always so easy," she murmured. The girl looked up, eyes quiet with curiosity. "Years ago," the woman said, "one winter morning before you were born, the fire didn't catch." She rested her hands in her lap and stared into the ember glow, the memory rising like smoke. "It had snowed in the night. Deep and fast. I thought I'd banked it well the night before. Good wood, good ash covering. But I was careless. I left the shutters ajar and the wind pulled through the chimney like a thief. By morning, nothing but grey ash and cold brick." She let the silence hang a moment. The girl didn't interrupt. "I had no flint, and your father was away. I remember sitting here, right where we are now, with your brother wrapped in my shawl and a pan of oats that wouldn't warm. We had to wait hours, until Mistress Allwine saw the smoke hadn't risen and came to check." She smiled, just faintly, at the name. "Mistress Allwine lived near the mill. You remember her? The one with the long braid and the red skirts. She had a way with fires." The girl nodded. "She came to your wedding feast. She brought the pickled cherries." "That's right," said her mother. "She came in without knocking. She never knocked, and saw what had happened, said only, 'That won't do.' Then took off her gloves and set to work like it was just another bit of mending." The woman chuckled gently, her voice like rustling wool. "She swept out the hearth, stacked the wood, sideways, not crosswise, and stuffed a bit of birch bark beneath. But before she lit it, she leaned in close like she was whispering to a friend. The girl blinked slowly. What did she say? "Don't be stubborn. You know what's needed." The girl smiled. "And it worked?" "It did," her mother said. "In moments. That fire burned so hot I had to push the pot aside." She paused, her gaze warming. "She told me to keep a bit of salt near the hearth from then on. Sprinkle it on the coals when they seem unsure. Said it reminded the fire it was still wanted." The girl tilted her head, curious. "Do you still do that?" "Sometimes," her mother said, reaching toward a small cloth pouch near the mantel. "Just a pinch, when the weather turns." She dusted her fingers over the hearth, where the fire rested, and whispered, not loudly, but with the quiet affection one might give to a friend long trusted, "There now, sleep warm." The girl didn't speak again, but leaned more fully into her mother's side. Outside the wind had picked up, but the house held firm. The shutters did not rattle. The fire slept, but it did not fade. Somewhere in the walls, the last warmth of the day moved through the stone and beam, steadying the night, and the women, one grown, one growing, sat beside it, passing between them, without rush, the old and ordinary magic of keeping something alive. The light is changing, not abruptly, not as though the sun falls from the sky, but gradually, inch by inch, the colours of the day fade into the dim blue hush of evening. Inside the Tudor cottage, the shadows stretch longer along the floorboards. The stone walls catch the last of the golden hour light, turning briefly to warm honey before settling into grey. Dinner begins before the food is even touched. It begins with quiet hands. The eldest daughter is shelling peas in a wide wooden bowl. Her fingers are quick, practiced. The pods pop open with soft little cracks, and the green beads drop in with muted thuds. She doesn't speak but hums softly, a song her mother used to sing when the girl was much smaller, and dinner had felt like something magical. Near the hearth, her younger brother kneels to fetch a bit of water from the iron kettle. It's already warm, having sat on the coals since late afternoon. He pours it into the earthenware basin to rinse carrots pulled earlier from the soil, their skins still streaked with earth, their tops freshly trimmed. The mother stirs the pot suspended over the hearth. It's a gentle stew tonight. Leeks and barley, a bit of salt pork, herbs from the garden hung long ago and now dry and fragrant. She adds a pinch of rosemary, then folds it in slowly, watching the surface ripple once, then settle. A small round loaf, baked that morning, rests on the table, wrapped in cloth to keep it warm. Beside it, a pat of butter pressed into a wooden mould shaped like a wheat sheaf, a wedge of hard cheese, a bit of ale, not a feast, but enough. When the food is ready, it is not announced. There is no call across the house, no clatter of urgency. Instead, the mother simply removes the pot from the hearth and places it at the centre of the table, and by instinct, or rhythm, the children gather. The table is not grand. It wobbles slightly on one leg, and its surface bears the faint marks of many meals. A dark stain here from spilled cider, a pale ring there from a too-hot pan. They sit close. The room is small and the air is warm. The only light comes from the hearth and a single beeswax candle set near the salt bowl. The food is ladled in silence. First the broth, then the barley, then the soft root vegetables that break apart on the spoon. A quiet clink of bowls, a whispered "thank you," the scrape of the wooden spoon against the pot. They eat slowly, not from fatigue but from presence. The warmth from the stew fills the belly. The scent of leeks and herbs clings to the air. Outside, an owl calls once, distant and low. They do not rush. When the bowls are emptied and wiped clean with bits of bread, the girl gathers them, rinsing them briefly in warm water from the basin, then wiping them with the cloth kept for this very purpose, rough but clean. The boy carries the butter dish back to the pantry, a shelf beside the back wall, cooler and shaded. He replaces the cloth carefully, pressing its corners down with a small stone. There is still a little light in the room, just enough to see by. The mother folds the towel that dried the bowls and sets it across the hearth bench to finish airing. The candle flickers, the fire breathes low. Evening turns toward night now, the chores remaining a few. The girl steps outside for a moment, barefoot on the worn stone path, to shake crumbs from the cloth used at the table. She lingers, breathing in the cool, damp scent of grass and early dew. Above, the first star winks into sight. Inside, her mother has begun to braid her hair for the night. Long strands pulled gently back from her temples, woven with fingers that know each coil. She does not use a ribbon, just a twist of linen. When the girl returns, she takes her brother's hand and leads him to the basin. He yawns but washes as he's been taught, face, hands, behind the ears. A small towel waits folded beside the pitcher. Their sleeping space is simple. Up the ladder beneath the thatched roof, the children share a straw-stuffed mattress laid with a wool blanket and linen sheets. The mattress rustles as they climb beneath it. There is no light but what remains from the candle downstairs. Below, the mother banks the fire. A ritual. She gathers the coals together, sets kindling across them just so, and places 2 small logs beside it. Not for now, but for tomorrow. She does not speak, but hums. Not quite a lullaby, but something close. Once the hearth is ready, she places the iron plate across the front and sets the heavy kettle on top, just enough water inside to warm in the morning. She looks over the room once more. The broom leans in its corner. The pot is cleaned. The breadcloth has dried. The shutters are closed. There is nothing more to do. She carries the candle to the edge of the ladder and listens. 2 soft breaths above. A creak of shifting weight. Then stillness. She ascends slowly. The bed upstairs is no grand thing, just another straw tick, softer with age, folded blankets that smell faintly of lavender and thyme. She sets the candle down and pulls the blanket over her knees. Outside, the wind has risen a little, not harsh, but constant. A hush that brushes the walls and eaves, like water wrapping around stone. The house does not protest. It breathes with the wind. It has done so for generations. She lays down, hands across her belly, eyes soft in the near dark. She does not close them yet. She watches the little flames stretch upward, then bend, then still. A quiet moment. Then she pinches the wick between her fingers, and the flame is gone. Darkness, complete and kind, and within that darkness, the warmth of wool, the steady breath of the sleeping children, the deep memory of earth and timber and clay. She listens, not for sound, but for stillness. It is there, everywhere, like a blanket pulled gently over the whole of the world. The day is done. The work is done. The house is quiet. And so you too may rest. You have seen the hearth. You have heard the voices. You have sat at the table and watched the shadows climb the walls. Let your breath slow. Let the hush of the Tudor evening settle into your thoughts. And if your eyes grow heavy, know that you are home. Warm, safe, and still. Yet not every household closes the day in quite the same way. A short walk beyond the hedgerow, past the hollow lane where puddles form in soft weather, and over the low stone bridge, there stands another home. It is broader than the first, built of timber and daub, with a tall central chimney and well-glazed windows that catch the last of the sky's blue. This house belongs to a yeoman family, their land larger, their cupboards a little fuller, their days shaped by both duty and modest comfort. Inside, the table is longer. 6 chairs, each with arms carved and worn from generations of use. A jug of cider rests beside a plate of cold sliced beef, laid out with onions pickled in small clay jars. Here a servant girl clears the trenchers with quiet grace, while the master's youngest son pulls off his boots and sets them by the hearth. The fire is brighter, freshly stoked. It throws a wide light across the tiled floor. The eldest daughter sits on a stool near the fire, stitching the hem of her mother's apron. Her needlework is steady, her head bowed, the candlelight catching in her hair. In the next room, the father marks the ledger. Slow, careful script by the light of an oil lamp. The sounds are hushed, respectful. The mother speaks little, but she moves from room to room with the soft weight of authority, placing folded linen in chests, checking that the latch on the back door is firm. A small dog turns twice in its blanket basket, sighs once, then settles. Though their linens are finer, though their walls are thicker still, the patterns echo the same truth. The day ends with intention, not with haste. Candles are snuffed, the embers tucked, the shutters closed with gentle hands. And upstairs, the children nestle into beds not so different from those of the humbler house, straw and wool warmed with stone, softened by the closeness of sleep. The night does not favour the wealthy or the poor. It falls evenly, kindly, on every rooftop. And so, whether by humble hearth or wide fireplace, whether by spoonfuls of broth or platters of beef, the houses settle. The village exhales, the world folds itself into dusk. And now, dear listener, you may let it go too. The rooms you've wandered, they wait in your memory like gently pressed pages. The fire still glows behind your eyelids. The bread still rests beneath its cloth. The shutters are drawn. The fields beyond are hushed. The day has ended. And you too are home. Thank you for spending this time here, for walking the quiet halls of the past with me. It means more than you know. I hope something in this story made you feel calm, or seen, or simply not so alone in the hush of night. If you'd like to join this growing circle of quiet minds, you're warmly invited to subscribe to Obscure Chronicle. And if you'd like to share how the story felt for you, or even just tell me where you're listening from, I'd love to read it in the comments. We are all part of history. Not the loud parts, perhaps, but the soft ones, the ones that matter. So rest now, deeply. I'll be here again soon. Until then, sleep warm, sleep safe. Good night.